I would say these are very important elements. You want to enjoy you want to enjoy yourself. You want to be pleased by your infrastructure. So walking is a very, very also dedicated to your mental perception and to your mental health. Of course, it's also about the cities. We want to make the cities livable again. It's good for health. That's I was telling that also in the morning. And we have to get out of the silos and integrate it from the early beginning everywhere, because the planners are mostly, and also the guidelines are mostly taking into account the needs of car parks, of lane wides, of whatever, and walking is then the rest. And you can see that in a lot of places. So, and what we then said, as a federal government, we see in Austria a patchwork. We had very, very good cities. If you have been in Vienna, it's really good for walking. Or if you go to Graz or other cities. But you will also find in Austria cities where it's not good for walking. So there is a patchwork. And as a federal government, we are responsible for target setting and for achieving targets. And for that, we need not a patchwork, but we need the main making walking as a mainstream to get the full potential of walking. Because if you look at the car trips, it's a similar in Ireland. I have seen 50% of our car trips are less than 5 kilometers, 25 or 23 are less than 2 kilometers. So we have a short distance transport problem. But we only deal on the national government on a European level with long distance transport problems. And we have to change this perception. Therefore, we decided to make a national master plan on walking. And the first one was elaborated 2015. It was also on occasion on the Walk15, which was in Vienna at that time. And this was the first time that the federal government designs and creates a strategy for Austria to promote walking nationwide, which was not existing before. The main focus was here on coordination efforts. So we asked the federal states to establish local and regional walking coordinators, people responsible in the administration on that. It's not only about financial means, it's also about human resources. You need committed human resources, people also in local governments, in regional governments, working together, sitting together. Because as I said, we are a federal country, we have to put on action always in partnership, 26 recommendations, 10 fields of action. So a lot of things has happened since then. No, it's too short. So I was telling you secrets. It's happening. Technological. Okay. So, as I said, major focus on coordination between the government levels. We established a lot of cities established since then positive developments on walking, pedestrianization, shared space was introduced. So I think there was some kind of a movement, because the local governments and the regional governments recognized that it's a national priority and that makes a difference. And we also established annual conferences and we put the focus in our national-wide program on climate-friendly mobility, also focus on walking. Produced a data handbook and so on. But not additional money from the federal level. So that was a series of conferences. And after this 6 years, we said, okay, we have now new targets for 2030. We have targets for 2040. We want to be climate neutral 2040, and we need to fulfill the requirements for 2030. We need also to relaunch and adapt our master plan for walking. Therefore, we started the process to establish a second edition for time horizon 2030. And we were very lucky that we got a new government, which gives a focus on active mobility in the government treaty. So that's the basic for the coalition. In Austria, we have a conservative green coalition. And this is now in the government, a special focus on active mobility and also on walking. It's the first time that walking was mentioned in a national government treaty. So we influenced also the national authorities. And we decided to create this plan, not alone as a ministry, but in the coordination group with all the federal states and the representatives of the cities, because we need them also to to take ownership of this plan of the federal level. And then we had a long debate on objectives, because the first master plan had no quantitative objective. And this time we achieved, I think, a very good development that was common sense. We need a new quantitative target as a commitment for the whole country. We have now set the target. We want to increase the share of walking now again from now 17 to 20%, which is ambitious if you look at the mainstreams. So this is, I think, a very target which was agreed amongst the federal states, because of a long debate on that. 10 fields of action, 50 concrete measures, and it will be launched in 2 weeks, 3 weeks at the National Walking Conference in Austria by our minister. So you see, it's now in. What are the 10 fields of action? First of all, the walking strategies and coordination. So we want to convince, and a lot of regions have already done that, to establish also regional and local master plans on walking. This is, I think, very important to make this comprehensive approach working. And secondly, that's very important. We need an increase of our investments and funding for walking infrastructure, also from the federal level. I think that's very important. This is a step forward compared to the old master plan. Thirdly, we need to influence our planning guidelines, which is very important, how to create street design and all this stuff. And the urban planning issue is a very hot topic, still not solved, because the federal level has no competence on that. It's up to the federal states. So we can only preach them and have a carrot of money, for example, for changing. And one very important topic is multimodality. We see that walking and public transport should be the Siamese, Geminis, because they depend on each other and have to be a very easy access to public transport. So that's. The legal framework is also important. Traffic codes, the organization of how traffic is organized. We changed already some very important things. Information and digitalization is absolutely a positive thing for pedestrianization and for walking. All this navigation system, all kind of this stuff. But sometimes it creates also new barriers. So we have to be careful with digitalization, because not everybody has a smartphone. We have older, elderly people, we have very young people, so be careful on that. The health factor is now much more integrated, so the Ministry of Health is also participating in this process. And the economic factor, we will now launch a study on the economic importance of the walking sector in Austria. We have done this for the cycling sector, very powerful results. And as I said before, walking is the basics for local economy. And finally, we want to change our statistics. We want to switch from this classical model split statistic to a better approach, to better take into account walking. Now, the good news, we have now much more money available. This was in parallel to the elaboration of this master plan. It was a 15-fold increase of our budget. So we have now 60 million euro per year. We have now negotiations, so we hope that a little bit more. But this is for active mobility, including walking infrastructure. For the first time, the federal government supports now municipalities in high quality walking infrastructure. High quality means not classical sidewalks, but pedestrian zones, shared zones, shortcuts. All precondition for that, and that's very important, is that the local level has to establish a local master plan on walking. So not to fall into the trap, making 100 meter there, 50 meter there, and some patchwork of measures, but a comprehensive strategy. So if you and we have, I think, a very attractive 50% co-finance possibility. We elaborated a handbook because there was a big demand. All the cities came to how we can make a local master plan on walking. But I think now more and more cities come up and say, if we want to get the carrot of the federal money, then we need to make this. And this has proven to be very effective. We have achieved a good dynamics amongst the cities. 10 local master plans already underway this year. We announced that early this year. And these are within the applications for federal funding. They have to also prove that they have elaborated these local master plans. And also, for example, all districts of Vienna, that are 23 districts, are now making district plans, local district plans for walking, and also smaller cities. So this is a very good development we achieved in parallel for elaborating the master plan. And another activity in parallel was the change of our traffic code. So we introduced school streets. We introduced a ban not to pass when a public transport tram or a bus is in the station. So you are not allowed anymore to pass with your car. And we have also new traffic signs. And it's not allowed also to put your car in a way that you block the pedestrian. So there are a lot of pedestrian-friendly measures already implemented. And I think, I don't know if you were in the 60s in Vienna, it looked like that. The city center of Vienna, I think, was very similar to your Irish pictures in the opening. And if you look today, that is the target, the objective we want to achieve. Give the urban space back to humans. And let's start walking promotion together. That's the best way.
Thank you, Robert. I think every city probably has that before and after photo, or at least a desire to change it to that better situation. So thank you. We're coming up now to our two speakers who are joining us remotely. One will be dialing in live, and the other is going to be a pre-record. Now we're just making sure that Paolo Cambra is able to join us. Now we'll just give it a few minutes, and what we will go to is the presentation from Robin Davies. So Robin has a pre-recorded presentation. So Robin is an urbanist and transport planner from the Department of Transportation and Main Roads in Queensland in Australia. Robin has 20 years plus experience in state and local government, both in Australia and in the UK. And Robin is joined by Leah Gamble and Andrew Ross from their walking team in the transportation and main roads in Queensland. Yeah, but I think we're going to go with Robin on the pre-record first. Yeah. And then we can get, if Paolo's then available, gives us a chance. Is that okay?
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Okay. Just bear with us. Maybe Paolo.
I'm here.
Can we just go back to Paolo while we have him? Okay. So I'll do an introduction for Paolo now instead.
Okay.
So, welcome. Paolo is joining us from Lisbon in Portugal, I presume. Now, Paolo is has a PhD in transportation systems, also an MSc in urbanism and spatial planning, and is an urban planner by profession. Paolo has worked as part of multidisciplinary teams collaborating to form spatial and mobility plans. He's currently an officer at the Competence Centre for Planning, Policy and Foresight in Public Administration. I hope I've gotten that right. And I think you're joined by colleagues here. I think Sophia Bento perhaps is at the conference today. Paolo, thanks for joining us, and I'll hand it over to you.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Robert. I hope the echo is gone. Hello all, it's great to be here at Walk21 again, and I'm just sorry I can't be really there to meet you in person. Let me also greet the audience and pose you that classic question. When you ask you, what's the first thing that comes to your mind? So I ask you, what's the first thing that comes to your mind when you're talking about national walking strategies? You can close your eyes if you want to. So probably your thoughts matched some of these ideas. And of course, they are all important and they are all connected. And for sure, you can't really leave out any of these aspects. So when you try to envision your national walking strategy, what do we really want for a national walking strategy? Well, perhaps we want to make a country where walking is an attractive and safe daily mobility option, contributing to an active, healthy, happy, sustainable life for all of us pedestrians. Yeah, but the problem is how. So let me introduce you briefly to the Portuguese walking strategy. Back in 2017, the Portuguese government decided to launch this national strategy for active mobility, so walking plus cycling. Well, now, during public consultation, there was some contestation on the active mobility package because it really left out walking and was more into cycling. So afterwards, the government decided to make two distinct strategies, one for cycling, one for walking. And this is interesting, as we've seen before in the previous presentations, cycling, friend or foe. So then a work group was then created, and attention here, this final version has been delivered this same month, September, and it is expected that it will be approved this same week during the Mobility Week. Now, this work group was led by the Institute of Mobility and Transportations, IMT, and yes, Sophia Bento there in the audience was actually one of the leaders. And there's a lot of people participating from road safety, infrastructure, municipalities, urban planning, education, health. Then another 25 meetings were made involving various stakeholders. This was universities, NGO, activists, associations for impaired mobility. And I was there. I was very happy to participate there as an academic. So the strong words of the Portuguese walking strategy, of course, the promotion of walking for commuting and leisure purposes, but also to promote the change of the mobility paradigm, decarbonize the economy, improve public health, and humanize and create more resilient territories. And this is all supported by these 5 strategic axes: education, culture, planning, infrastructure, taxation, and incentives. Now, I'm really curious to see the final results. I haven't seen it yet. And I wish all the best for the implementation of the Portuguese walking strategy. Now, back to the how. So now I work in this planning cabinet of the Portuguese Center of Government, and I have to deal with the whole planning system of the country. So all the strategies and national plans. And yeah, there's around 140 of them. And no, it's fine. OECD says it's normal to have hundreds of them. But my first concern here would be how to prevent this national walking strategy from being another plan, just another collection of good intentions. How to make it stand, especially when many of the topics covered by the walking strategy are already covered in existing strategy, like physical activity or sustainable mobility. So you may ask, do we really need a strategy for walking? I mean, it's everywhere. And yes, walking is everywhere, and it really should be everywhere. Because the more interactions and synergies between strategic planning instruments can be established, the more efficiently the national strategy for walking can achieve its goals. For instance, if you invest in mass transit and more people use it, more people will walk more. But also, if you plan your mass transit, you should be putting the pedestrian first in your project. So be stronger together, right?
Paolo, would you be able to share your screen there? The presentation isn't moving along.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Okay. but I shared this. Let's try again. Okay, is it moving? Hello?
No, the presentation isn't up at the moment.
Okay, so I'm sorry about that. Let's leave. Check this one. Okay. Now working?
Yeah, that's moving along now. Thank you.
Ooh, so I'm so sorry. So it was moving in my screen. That's why I was so happy to go through it. So this was the thing of what you think of walking strategy, what do you mean? Portuguese walking strategy. So the guys involved in the Portuguese walking strategy. And the main strategic axis of the Portuguese walking strategy. I hope you managed to listen to it, but I'll be happy to share this anyway. And you can always ask Sophie for this. So I was here talking about this constellation of planning instruments at the national level, and there's 140, and I was sharing with you my concern of how to prevent these national strategies for being just another plan, for being just another collection of good intentions, when you have a lot of other strategic planning instruments that are covered, that already cover walking, like physical activity and sustainable mobility. That goes to the point to think, why should we really need a particular strategy for walking, and why don't we incorporate walking in all the other strategies? And yeah, I think that should be a win-win situation when we have interactions and synergy between these strategic instrument plans, and you can gain from direct and indirect effects. For instance, if you invest in public transportation, if people use public transportation more, then they'll walk more. So try this horizontal alignment. Okay, so I was here now to talk to you about the other challenge. Is not horizontal alignment; is this vertical alignment? Why do you think of national strategies at this national level? Does it make it sense to be national, or more sense to be local? I mean, we could just have these local plans, city plans, because most people live and walk in the cities, right? That's true, and that's why without this vertical alignment between the national guidelines and the local level implementation, this national walking strategy may not be very effective at all. So that leads us to the question, what governance structures should be in place to ensure this alignment? And of course, this is a lot easier said than done. And I have two challenges here for the debate. So the first one is how to link this national walking strategy to the local urban planning, and fast. I mean, what you see here in this picture is legal. This is urban development that goes by all the planning rules, but it's at the same time, it's very sad. And what's even sadder than this is that I didn't even have to look for this example. I just zoomed in Lisbon metropolitan area, and I found it. So if we are allowed today to build these very non-walkable cities, then we can have all these walking strategies, but they're going to be very ineffective in the future. And this leads to the other alignment challenge. Who's in charge of the pedestrian? Which ministry is responsible for walking? Is it transportation, or should it be? Is it climate change, justice, silly walks? Who is there to ensure the political action, to ensure this horizontal and vertical alignment? So wrapping it up, if you have this national walk strategy for walking, with all these perfectly set goals and measures, if it doesn't really tick any other strategy, if it doesn't influence any other national-wide planning, if it doesn't combine with other plans, and here you have to think of direct and indirect effects, but also think about budget. And if it doesn't find a way to spill over the local level, urban planning and transportation planning, and here we also talk about this technical knowledge about walking, the awareness of the planning practitioners of the role of the pedestrian. And if none of this is done with a good political backup, well, then we may be well missing a good opportunity here. So please share with us your success stories or your growing pains, because we're just about to have our first national walking strategy. Thank you so much for your attention. I apologize for the presentation, not moving as fast as me. And don't forget, Sophia is there with you to carry on the discussion. Thank you once again.
Same, so there's a lot of similarities, definitely. I think we will try and go to the presentation from Robin now. Just wondering if we're good. And again, thank you, Paolo, and Sophia is somewhere here in the audience. So here, great. So we'll invite you down when we come to the discussion. So don't need the introduction again. So if Robin's presentation is ready, we might go to that. Thanks.
Hi everyone. My name is Robin. Hi everyone, it's lovely to be joining you from Brisbane. My name is Robin, I'm the manager of cycling and walking in the public transport and maintenance in Queensland. A shout out to my colleagues Lee Gamble and Andrew Ross, who are
to Catherine, wherever Catherine is. So Professor Catherine Woods is going to be here in person. You're okay there for a second, Catherine, thanks. So Catherine is from the Irish Physical Activity Research Collaboration, or IPARC, based in the University of Limerick. Catherine is the chair of the Physical Activity for Health in the Department of Physical Education and Sports Sciences at the University in Limerick. Catherine is also a member of UL's Research Institute, and Catherine's research cuts across a range of themes, including lifestyle, health, and technology. So, Catherine, thank you, and thank you for filling the breach and coming ahead sooner than we thought. Okay.
Thank you. Okay. I'll just wait for my presentation to come. I thoroughly enjoyed the presentations today, so thank you very much for that. My presentation is slightly different. I'm taking a public health perspective on the contribution of physical activity, of which walking and cycling are really, really important parts to the overall health, well-being, economic. It hits on so many different outcomes. And really this is a call to action to all of you individuals involved in transport planning.
Just the camera, just on where the whiteboard is.
Oh, here?
You know, so people who are online, they won't
yes.
see you.
Okay, sorry, I'm not used to being a PE teacher. I'm not used to standing behind things. I normally walk up and down when I present. I feel like I've been put in a box. Anyway, so it's a call to action to anyone in architecture, urban planning, transport, engineering, all of those different professions that I don't even know personally, that you really have an important role to play in addressing this, what we refer to in the public health field as an inactivity pandemic. And it goes from the age of few months old to later life, but it really is a call to action, and you guys are crucial to finding the solutions to this. So I'm presenting on behalf of the Irish Physical Activity Research Collaboration. And the purpose of this collaboration was to bring the research, practice and policymakers together to provide solutions across multiple sectors. It's about changing the system in which we live to promote physical activity. And I can't see my slides, so yeah, just a very big welcome to everyone. Sorry. What you see here on the slide is that 13% of our children are meeting the physical activity recommendations that we know will protect their current health and prevent health problems in the future. That's one, or just over 1 out of every 10 children. 46% of adults and 33% of older adults are meeting those very minimum criteria. These are not hard criteria, but they are very minimum criteria. And one of the really most popular forms of physical activity is walking. Without a shadow of a doubt, it is the most popular form of physical activity for every age group. And it's engaged in by people of all levels of fitness, all levels of ability, all levels of socioeconomic status, and so on and so forth. So you have the solution, you have the intervention at your fingertips. But we heard from our colleagues in Austria that 25% of people living 2 to 3 kilometers away are choosing to use their car as opposed to walk. And that increases when the distance increases. So how do we actually get people out of their cars and to use the infrastructure that you're talking about to make the journeys more accessible? These are all of the policies that we have in Ireland. In actual fact, we estimate that we have at least 18 national policies that either have a role to directly or indirectly impact on physical activity of the people that live in this country. Education, healthcare, social inequalities, justice, children and youth, transport, sport, they all have a role to play. But the challenge is, and IPARC, the Irish Physical Activity Research Collaboration, was set up when the two ministers, one the Minister of Health and two the Minister of Transport, Tourism and Sport at the time, said we need to come together and have multiple agendas but one common goal. The goal to increase physical activity, the agendas, whether it's for sustainability, climate change, mobility, whether it's for education, whether it's for health, whether it's for sport, multiple agendas, one common goal, but we need to work together. And they had a number of objectives to meet. And the reason for this was, and I don't know if you've seen this slide before, but this comes from the National Implementation Research Network. And what it says is, if you have lots of good ideas, but they are working in not knowing what each other is doing, then you have disorder and confusion. If you take these ideas and they work in isolation, you'll have impact, but it will be only at the individual level. What you really need to do is get all of your different ideas working either in coordinated way with aligned impact, but ideally in a collective way where they work in collaboration. And the thinking behind the Irish Physical Activity Research Collaboration was to use this formula to achieve that. So what you need, according to the NERN research formula, what you need is effective interventions that are effectively implemented within an enabling context. And the result of that is multiplicative. It's not additive, it's exponential. And if you really want to achieve socially significant change, then this formula is a way that you can actually use that. So let's take walking. If walking is the behavior you want to change, you have the effective interventions, i.e. people may walk to work, or they may walk to school, or they may walk for pleasure. That could be your effective. We know if people walk, that they get lots of health benefits, social benefits, and so on out of it. That's our effective intervention. But it has to be effectively implemented without footpaths that are continuous and don't stop every 100 meters, without shortcuts, without traffic restrictions, without people being in charge of the pedestrians and looking after the pedestrians. Those walking programs, or people walking for different reasons, it won't happen. So you need the walking programs or the reasons to walk by the implementation methods, making it the easy choice to actually walk. And if you have a policy context behind that, so be it from your departments of health, transport, urban design, whatever, if you have that policy context enabling the effective interventions by the effective implementation methods, then you will achieve your socially significant change. And that's where your walking strategies become very, very important. So we were funded by the Health Research Board to set up the Irish Physical Activity Research Collaboration. And what we really wanted to do was find out, how do we successfully implement effective physical activity interventions to reduce physical inactivity in the Irish population? You can see here the research institutes, the government agencies, and the government departments that were involved. We combined these with a practitioner advisory group and a research advisory group. And I see Derek here is one of the members of this, and Enrique up here as well is our IPARC coordinator. So basically what we're trying to do is bring a cross-sector collaboration together to achieve increased physical activity. One that fosters the insight, intelligence, and innovation to enable more people in Ireland to be more active more often. And these were the objectives that came from the ground up. One, we want to share policy or involve multiple stakeholders to identify gaps and develop ways to bridge these gaps, share and able solutions. So if, for example, I'm working with a sports person and they want children to access Gaelic football or basketball in an area, then I need to work with my transport planners to make sure they can walk or cycle to those situations. So you've got connected, the system works to the physical activity solution. Share learnings and best practices, and then demonstrate the impact of IPARC. We have developed a knowledge translation plan for IPARC, and over the duration of IPARC, we're going in now into our third year, but over the first 2 years, it was really about getting our policymakers to come to events like this. For me, this is wonderful to see, because you've lots of policymakers in this audience, along with your scientists should be here as well, or your researchers and your practitioners. That's what IPARC is. It's bringing all of those groups together. And here You can see us presenting at conferences like this, but our presentation would have been researcher, practitioner, and policymaker presenting. We've developed 3 toolkits. One, an evaluation toolkit. We presented a workshop on that yesterday. It's how to evaluate a physical activity intervention that you might have, which could be a walking program, for example. Without going into this, but basically we reduced the sort of number of instruments that went into this toolkit down to 46 questions through systematic methods. But the key learnings were, if you're going to evaluate something, it has to be pragmatic and it has to be robust. Don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good, but it has to be robust enough to stand up. We did a systematic literature review, and what your evaluation has to be is useful and useful to addressing the problem. We had a practitioner advisory group, always going back down to the individual who this was going to impact on, and they advise us all the way along. Technology enabled your solution and use graphics when it comes to reporting the outcome of your evaluation. We developed an effective implementation toolkit. So if you have a good idea, how do you ensure that it's effectively implemented? And for this, we conducted a systematic literature review published in the International Journal of Behavioral Nutrition and Physical Activity. We then identified exemplar interventions and interviewed the coordinators of these interventions, the practitioners that ran these interventions, and the participants that took part. And we asked them, what are the characteristics of effective implementation when it comes to programs on the ground? And basically what we found, some of the key outcomes here were that these were factors with no positive influence on the implementation of an intervention to factors that have a substantial and a positive impact on the implementation of an intervention. So say you have a program, say you want to encourage people to use your walking trail, and it's in a local community. Then on the right-hand side of your slide, things like high level of community interest has a substantial and positive influence on the likelihood of that intervention being taken up by your community. Compatibility of the intervention with current practices. So it doesn't have to be something brand new and very innovative, or it can be, but it has to be compatible with what's already there. Whereas over on the left-hand side, what you can see is something like getting a high-profile champion to champion your new thing. Actually, there is no evidence that that has positive and sustainable impact. It might generate media interest, but there is no evidence that that is positive in terms of substantial. Whereas the much more governance ideas are very important. So we have 2 publications. So our key learnings on this was the importance of the inner setting in the governance structure. Physical activity intervention must fit into the policy agenda, constantly reflecting on what's working and what's not. Broad partnerships are important, but that's really challenging. It's much easier to stay within your own partnership and your own areas, but to broaden it out is absolutely necessary if you want your program to be sustainable long-term. But that is challenging. And consistency of implementing barriers and facilitators across countries. We found that these factors in our systematic review hold up if you're in Ireland, if you're in America, if you're in Canada, they hold up across countries, which we thought, when it comes to community interventions, was very interesting. The enabling context, I just want to fly through this. This is about developing the systems. We have a systems-based toolkit. So if you're going into an active city now, you want to develop an active city and you want all of your stakeholders to be at that table to raise the agenda of what is an active city and how do we get it more active. Then from a physical activity systems base, we've developed a methodology to help you bring those stakeholders together and to get them to voice what it is that needs to happen, what are the barriers and what are the facilitators to allowing that systematic approach. And this is our systems workshop in Dublin in 2020. So obviously impact as well, IPARC, at the IPARC conference, during the 3 days of the conference in 2020, we had 167 views, but 1 year later, that had gone up to 1,727 views. So it's about building your recognition as well. So just to say, the project team and the advisory panel, the systems-based workshop and the conferences and key learnings, policy mapping, attaining buy-in is very important. And to finish, you begin with a need when it comes to promoting physical activity. This comes from possibly your policy, but also your surveillance work. Then you look at matching that with the funding that's available, finding examples of effective interventions, gathering evidence of the impact of those interventions, and developing a database. And this is where the toolkits fit in. So that's us. Oh, no. Okay, that's just some outcomes that we had over the timeline of the project. And just to say, we've now been funded to move to IPARC 2.0 by the knowledge users. So thank you very much. And yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Catherine. I think plenty of food for thought there. Some really great ideas around implementation and collaboration and working across the policy, research and practice areas. So might try and see, can we get Robin's presentation up? And I think we had some issues with the sound, so I'll just stay here until kind of we get it going, and if it doesn't work, we'll probably go to discussion then.
Hi everyone, my name is Robin. I'm the Walking in with Public Transport and Main Roads in Brisbane, Queensland. Shout out to my colleagues Lou Randall and Andrew Ross, who are co-collaborators on the presentation and who Brisbane, Queensland, Leeds, I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land that join me today. I acknowledge the Turrbal elders past, present and emerging. And I also acknowledge the First Nations people joining us today. This next slide is a presentation of the story about what we do. So a very quick overview of my presentation today, but I'll People told us that they want better paths, better crossings, lower speeds, more shade, more separation from others. When we started on this journey, it was very limited for walking at the state level and limited funding. And we've got a situation, I suppose, with Ireland accessibility and inaccessibility, where we've done really good work in places, but we've got a long way to go with improving the connection. So in 2019, the Queensland Government released the Queensland Walking Strategy, a 10-year strategy that sets the direction, the vision, the priorities and the action areas for walking, and at that time a first 2-year action plan and a baseline report for measuring our progress. The release of the walking strategy 3 years ago now represented, I suppose, the end of the beginning. That was a really long sought initiative at the state level, and its development resulted from a 2017 election commitment that was sought by an advocacy group called Queensland.
Yeah, just means that we a greater degree of interaction. I'm not seeing any questions or queries coming up online. Sorry, Michael, this gentleman.
There was just one comment on this question of yours from the partnership Active Mobilities and Mass Action.
A shout out to my colleagues Lee Gamble and Andrew Ross, who are co-collaborators on this presentation and who do most of the work that I am going to be talking about in this presentation. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands from which I join you today. I acknowledge the Turrbal and Jagera peoples and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. And I also acknowledge any First Nations people joining us today from Australia or from around the world. This next slide is
okay. Well, I think we've already done something very good today. Connected up a few people who had queries and solutions.
It does take a bit of time, and the internet connection is not always very stable. So I will jump over it, but I will put a link to it in the chat when this presentation is happening. Queensland. You can watch it at your leisure. So a very quick overview of my presentation today, but I will be skipping over a few slides very quickly and be focusing a little more time on what I would see as some of the most effective levers that we have discovered from our work on walking in Queensland. And speaking of Queensland, so just to give you a little bit of context, overlaid the UK and Ireland on the map of Queensland so that you can see
I think the experience of walking, we found when we investigated that this was not apparent through the strategies always, but when we talked to the planners, and this was an important part of using the strategies, and also, and the use of campaigns came to as a really important part of the walking strategy. But unfortunately, it's not always measured, these things, and they don't really have indicators for this. So I think if it's a campaign to an advocacy group or something like that, they might have some numbers. But if it's the municipality that measures, it does not often happen.
So from the national level, you are not setting expectations around how this is to be measured or what you are expecting to see?
No, so that's the but it's a good input. I'll take it with me to suggest it. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Question from gentleman there in the sweater or in the blazer. Okay, but I'll let you decide between.
Arrive at the 17% target for walking?
No, 17% is the actual situation.
Okay,
so that was the 17%. If you look from the 50s to now, in all the countries, you can see that was we have seen it also from the Irish statistics. It's decrease of walking, increase of cars. It's a classical double effect. What we have achieved now is that there was an agreement that is the advantage compared to the first master plan to set a national target for Austria.
Okay.
So the target is now to increase it from 17% to 20%, which is an ambitious target because we have to fight against the further decrease.
Okay.
The first master plan was to stabilize it, so not further decrease. And now we have, this is also affected more local governments are also making local plans. And in the cities, they are, let's say, it's easier to raise the share of cycling, but for the national level, it's more complicated because you have a lot of rural areas. And in the rural areas, it's even worse. Every 100 meters, they took the car. It's a car society in the rural areas. The city centers are much easier to convince to walk. So that's the target. So that's an achievement. So we hope that this target setting approach is also then motivating regional or local governments to do the same. Because if you have those targets, you fly blind. That's usual. And we agreed. Let's make a target. If we don't achieve, we have then to explain why. But fix a target because this is a political signal to everybody. We want to stop this decrease and we have an increase again. So that's hopefully works. Let's keep the fingers crossed.
I just had a point on that. It's something I was going to bring up with the people who are presenting today. As the impact that car dependency is having on developing successful walking strategies. You alluded to it there. In the Irish context, 57% of all journeys less than 2 kilometres are by car. 73% of all journeys less than 4 kilometres are by car. And 2 kilometres is usually considered a reasonable walking distance. And that's actually going in the wrong direction in Ireland. Between 2014 and 2019, actually the recent statistics from 2021 show an improvement and actually a 6% increase in walking during COVID, which is a fascinating change in itself. Also within Ireland, the degree of car ownership has increased very dramatically. We had a doubling in between 1995 and 2015. In fact, there's 2.5 million cars on the roads in Ireland. So that's a car for every 2 people. So I suppose my question, and this is happening in a lot of places, and there's an interesting distinction between car ownership and then car use. And there's a decoupling in countries where there's successful active travel. I suppose the question to the speakers is, how do you think car dependency is impacting on our ability to develop successful walking strategies? And should our policy also be addressing the proliferation of car use and car size and car speeds and their impact on safety?
Of course. I mean, if you make a comprehensive strategy, then you have to put everything together. I mean, walking is a special strategy on walking because we said we have a mobility master plan for Austria. We have a general mobility plan where all these issues are taken into account. But we decided to specifically put the finger on walking, so not to neglect it behind. Otherwise, in normal mobility concept, you have one page on walking and the other pages are on the rest. But of course, the issue that direct promotion measures alone are not sufficient. You're fully right. So we have, therefore, for example, in our financial support program, where we grant federal money to the applicants, to a city, for example, the city can increase our co-financing when the city, of course, the more measures they do, but also when they make accompanying measures, for example, in land use planning, to make the classical approach a 15-minute city concept or a short distance, or to change land use regulations or parking regulations, because the parking management is a very powerful instrument to exactly influence this issue of car ownership and car use. Because we have several proofs that if you have a parking management scheme in a city, for example, in Vienna, the whole city has now background management where we have to pay. It's a big progress in the last year. And this influences the modal split and also walking again. And you are right, COVID was an additional, let's say, driver for this target setting, because we see for the first time an increase, an explosion of local walking trips, because this was and the re-investigation of the short distance local area, and this is also very important. And for that, the image of walking was increased, and it was also very clear we have not enough space for walking. We had requirements on social or personal distances, but it was impossible. You have to use the lanes, so you have to think on your urban design. There is all the space allocation was in favor of the cars in the last decades. You can see, and this has to be reversed, but it's not easy because it's a religion. You know, car is an ideology. It's a religion. And one car park, remove one car park. It's a historical fight between the shop owners, the inhabitants, and whatever. But COVID was at least one positive effect of COVID, and the image of active mobility has increased a lot. People are ready now to walk more than before.
It's good to know. I feel some comfort that it also happens in Austria. The pain of removing car parking spaces. So I might just come to Sophia. So Sophia, just from the Portuguese perspective, how does car dependency impact on what you're trying to do there?
Well, it is the same in Portugal as probably described in Austria, they do in Ireland. The modal split is the same. We walk very little and we are car dependent. And with the national strategy, we are trying to make another modal split.
Okay, thank you, Sophia. I'll come to you next, and then that gentleman has been very patient, who gave up his speaking time earlier. I'll come to you.
Thank you. A question to Marianne. What's the relation between the national walking strategy and the local strategies you're describing now? Could you elaborate a little bit on that? I'm curious. And in general, what is more promising, a top-down approach or a bottom-up approach, or as Paolo described it, as an alignment of things? Maybe that depends on every country, but it'd be an interesting debate what approach might be most promising. So also for the PEP, I imagine. So I'd be curious, first of all, how you tie it in Norway, and then maybe in general, what people think. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that this is an interesting question. I listened to the Austrian experience as well, but the Norwegian one is much more on a voluntary basis. So it's the national road authorities that has the responsibility for the national walking strategy, and it is a guideline, and they've done a great job collecting lots of data and knowledge about walking that local municipalities can use. But there is no, and they suggest that municipalities make a walking strategy. But there has to be some kind of local initiative if it's going to come together as a strategy. So it's so I guess in that way it is more of a bottom-up initiative, or it has to be a bottom-up initiative, but you can get some kind of help from the government, but not funding like they have in Austria. So that's interesting. I think the first few cities that made a walking strategy, they got some funding because they were early adopters of the strategies, but now you don't get any funding for that anymore. But yeah, so I think we have much to learn actually from the Austrian example. And when we talk to the planners, a lot of them said that they want this kind of framework or knowledge base that they can dip into, so they know where to start when they're making a strategy and what they should, how can they, what should they start counting, what should they evaluate, all these kinds of things.
Okay.
I mean, just to add, that this one very important issue for Austria was it's all the plans are voluntary. So because we're a federal country, so we cannot force our provinces or our cities to do a master plan, a local one. So the only vehicle we have is the money. And therefore, we decided to have to bind our financial support on this precondition. And this worked quite well. But for that, you need a government treaty where walking is in. Because otherwise, the finance ministry is saying, look, we have a subsidiarity issue because local walking is for local governments and they got a lot of money from the tax revenue. And I mean, talking about national strategies, but also European-wide, we have to pull out walking from this subsidiarity trap. Because subsidiarity means national level has nothing to do with that if you are a federal country. If you are a centralized country where you have the competence, there are some countries where they have a direct competence for planning infrastructure, that's a different story. But on the EU level, it's the same. We preached for the Commission several times, and during the Austrian presidency, we succeed for the first time that we had an informal meeting of transport environment ministers, and for the first time they say, okay, let's also talk on the EU level to elaborate a strategy on active mobility, because they have no strategy. Commission always say it's an urban issue. It's up to the urban framework. Now it's in the urban mobility framework still, but it's mentioned for the first time that active mobility is important. But this is opening or closing the doors to financial support, because if you say it's a local issue, then our finance, the federal level says why we should finance. And now we have said it's a priority because it's a government treaty status. We have to extend our contribution to that. That helps a lot because that means the whole government is behind that. And this, I think, is very important. And one last word, it was always the issue of, in Austria, as an additional issue, is the health argument. So the health ministry finally joined in. And also the issue of climate protection and all the climate neutrality targets. And for that, you need also active mobility as one part of the solution that helped for the argument.
Okay.
I mean, depending on the country constitution, institutional setup.
Thank you, Robert. Sorry.
Yeah. So my question is for all the speakers. Just to find out to what extent children and young people participated within the development of the national and regional policies, and what would their thoughts be on children and young people's participation in the development of walking strategies?
I just might start to maybe bring in some other people, and just into this, I might go to Catherine on that.
Yeah, so in relation to the Irish Physical Activity Research Collaboration, that's really practitioners, policymakers, and researchers, but they're all professionals within that. But within the sector, there is the education sector. So the voice of the children is very much reflected, particularly through the education sector, and that's how we need to come out. But we haven't developed a strategy or anything like that for iPark, so it's not as specific. But my feeling on a walking strategy would be absolutely true.
Okay, thank you, Catherine. So Sophia, and I think Paolo is maybe still with us, so whoever's going to, maybe this is the double act, you're here to interact in person. So, yeah.
I think it's very important to hear what they have to say. We saw that in the opening session, the importance of children. If you build an environment for children, the environment will be for everyone, and no one is left behind. Everybody will move freely through the city.
But quite often, there's children and the voice isn't given due weight. So it's realistically what I don't think that's a tokenism, and not to be
No, I think it's a fair point. I might just add, it is something that practitioners and policymakers are struggling with. I know the government here has a number of programs in place to try and encourage people to engage more with children. And I know from my own experience, there is a middle, even within that cohort, the early teens are often forgotten. You know, we design playgrounds for the younger ones, and then we move on to 17, 18, 19, but that in between, they sometimes are left out. I'm just interested, maybe experience from Mariana or Robert.
Yeah, I think we try to include children, but I agree with youth. They often because they have a kind of a easier way of getting around, so they're left off all the planning because they see it out, but they can move to this area or be somewhere else. But for children, there's a Norwegian method where you map where children go, and it's integrated with the school. So I think it's the fifth year of school where they learn about maps and things like that at school. They also do this exercise where they map their road to school and also places where they play. And you can, it's a GIS-based system, so they put in symbols and things like that. And so it is kind of a participatory process, but it has to happen through the school, and there are some trouble relating to the GDPR and things like that, so that and as long as there are children participating, the grown-ups or their parents has to allow the children to participate, but when it happens through the school, it's kind of easier to make it happen. So, yeah.
Okay. Catherine, did you want to come back in and follow?
It's just a reflection. When we were working with the Department of Education and looking at asking children to make their schools more active, the single biggest barrier to them walking or cycling to school was the school uniform, not the infrastructure. So it's a real call to reach out. So you might put the pathways in place, but sometimes it's other factors other than that that prevent children from using those spaces or accessing those spaces. Now, interestingly, when COVID hit, the physical education uniform was allowed to be used, and the normal uniform, was put away, and cycling went up, walking went up during that time. So infrastructure is really important, but don't forget your other stakeholders and the children themselves are going to be stakeholders.
Okay, I'm conscious of the time. We started probably about 10 minutes late, so maybe just a final point. And I just want to put a question maybe to round off to all the speakers. And I was just looking at some statistics around the budgets that various industries have in mobility. The e-scooter industry have 650 million per year this year. The electric vehicle market is 150 billion. That's what it's going to put on the market. So I'm just thinking what proportion of that is their marketing budget. Be interesting, even if it was only 1%, it's huge. And I think it comes back to a point we came up in the presentations. Who speaks for the pedestrian? Who, at an official level, at a governmental level, who's there to advocate for them? I'm not talking just about advocacy groups, and that's obviously important, but there's somebody there to talk about what the driver needs at government, or what the farmer needs, or what the business person needs, but the pedestrian. And I suppose my question to you is, if you had a multi-million euro budget for walking, maybe an unlimited budget for walking, what would you spend it on? Marketing budget. I'm going to come to, no one's putting their hand up or making eye contact with the speakers. I am going to go to Sophia.
Well, I don't really know how to answer your question because in Portugal we struggle with a lack of funding. And
I'm giving you a lot of money, so you don't need to worry now. If all the money.
I know, but I think our main concern will be education and changing behavioral aspects. That is very difficult. I think it is the major challenge is to change people's minds and let them know that walking is very good for everyone and not to be so car dependent. And we need to do a lot of advertising, raise awareness, campaigns. I think I will start by that.
That's a good start, I think. Catherine?
Infrastructure is permanent, and interventions or programs are very important, but you have to make it interesting as well. So having destinations that people will want to go to walk and make it easy to get there. The shortcuts idea is brilliant. So infrastructure, interventions,
and interest.
Okay, thank you, Pastor. So, Robert, any thoughts?
I mean, the most important factor is the combination of infrastructure plus awareness raising plus accompanying measures in land use planning. These three issues have been always in our thoughts when we designed the financial infrastructure support program. But investment is important because then you have, without investment, an awareness campaign makes no sense because if you have no good conditions for walking, but if you change the conditions for walking, combine it with a big awareness program, because then it doubles or triples the effect of the infrastructure. So that's the combination of the measures is important. So,
okay, thank you.
Then I give you the account number.
Yeah. Well, I think we can wire it directly to you. Okay. So, Marianne.
Yeah, I think so. I agree with the others. I think the infrastructure has to be in place so that if you get more people walking, they won't be kind of disappointed that they can't or feel unsafe when they walk. So I think it's a combination with infrastructure and behavior. But I also think it's important maybe to link it to public transport, because I think that public transport has an important relationship to walking.
Okay, that's great. So I think at that point, Paolo, did you want to come in? Have you you want to have the last word?
Not the last, but just to address your comment, to say with that budget, for sure, I would give out free shoes for everybody and good shoes for walking. And the thing is that we actually have a lot of money going on in investments. Like in Portugal, this little tiny poor country, we have a plan to spend 1,000 million euros in transportation infrastructures, in metros and trains expansions. So how much of that budget is allocated to actually study or plan the site, the urban environment, towards putting pedestrian first? So much budget. I think it should be very useful to start retraining all the planning professionals, all the engineers and landscapers, to refresh their minds and to learn how to do this in practice. Hope you heard me.
I think I bring in the leading advertising agency in Ireland, maybe someone that does work for Guinness, because they've managed to sell that all around the world, even though some people might have a view on how it tastes. But, there is an element, I feel, that we're trying to sell something. You see it with cycling, you see it with public transport. When people have actually a product to sell, they become very inventive and innovative around the marketing of it and lobbying and public affairs and all of those things. So look, that's great. I'd like to thank all of the speakers today and the people who've contributed to the discussion. So I'll start off with Mariana, Robert, Paolo, and Catherine. Unfortunately, Robin's presentation didn't work. And of course, I'd like to thank Sophia, who was here with us as well from Paolo's team. And I understand that the material or the presentations will be available. I don't know what the situation is with Robin's, but hopefully the organisers can make it available for you. And look, thank you to everyone here who attended, participated, and to whoever may be joining us online. And I wish you all the best for the rest of the conference and hope you enjoy it. Thank you.
Thank you.